It was a bright Saturday afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood where the houses were lined up neatly, the lawns were trimmed perfectly, and the streets seemed almost too clean to be real. Birds chirped from the trees, and the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air. Children usually ran around freely here, riding bikes or playing tag, and most of the neighbors knew each other well enough to greet one another with a nod or a smile. In one particular house, a boy about 12 years old was getting ready to run an errand. He was a lively child, full of curiosity and energy. His sneakers were slightly scuffed from the week's adventures, and his backpack swung loosely on his shoulder. Today, he had planned to deliver a few letters to neighbors who weren't at home during the weekdays. It was a small task, but he enjoyed it. He liked saying hello to people, seeing their smiles and feeling helpful. He slipped out the front door quietly so as not to disturb his younger sibling, who was still napping upstairs. The boy hopped onto his bike and pedaled down the driveway, waving at the neighbor across the street. She was trimming her hedges, and he gave a cheerful, "Good afternoon," that was met with a polite smile and a nod. He didn't think much about it. He assumed she was busy, but in reality she noticed him with more intensity than most neighbors would. The woman was in her mid-40s, always precise, always alert. She liked things to be orderly and predictable. Nothing about her life had prepared her for anything unusual, and she had a strict idea of what safe looked like in her neighborhood. Today, however, something about the boy's presence made her uneasy. Maybe it was the way he looked at her briefly as he passed. Maybe it was that she didn't recognize him from before. Whatever the reason, a small voice of suspicion whispered in her mind. As the boy continued down the street, she watched him carefully. She noticed him slow down near her yard, glancing at a corner where the mailboxes stood. To her, it looked unusual. Why would a kid linger like that? Her imagination, fueled by years of seeing news stories and warnings about strangers, began to run wild. She convinced herself that something wasn't right. She went inside, locking the door behind her, and picked up the phone. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the tension of the moment. She dialed the police, describing what she saw. "There's a boy in the neighborhood. I think he's up to something," she said, her voice tight. She explained that he looked suspicious, that he was lingering near the mailboxes, and that she felt unsafe. She didn't know exactly what he was doing, but she wanted someone to check. Meanwhile, the boy, unaware of the storm brewing across the street, was focused on his task. He approached the next house, placed a letter carefully in the mailbox, and waved at the elderly woman who peeked out of her window. "Hi," he called cheerfully. The woman smiled warmly, returning the wave. He felt good, proud of being helpful. Delivering mail was a small responsibility, but he liked that it made him feel trusted. Back at the house across the street, the woman continued to watch. She saw the boy move, saw him pause by another mailbox. Her unease grew into certainty. Something was off. She gripped her phone tighter and repeated the description of the boy, emphasizing that she didn't feel safe. She gave details about his clothing, his backpack, and his actions, painting a picture that in her mind justified her call. Within minutes, the distant sound of sirens reached the boy's ears. At first he thought it was a car passing by, but then the sound grew louder, and he noticed flashing lights reflecting off the windows of nearby houses. Confused, he slowed his bike and looked around. His heart started to beat faster. What was happening? Why were police cars here? He had done nothing wrong. He hadn't even crossed the street without looking. All he had done was deliver a few letters. Two police officers stepped out of their car, approaching him cautiously. They were polite but serious, trying to understand the situation quickly. "Hi there, son," one of them said. "Can we talk for a moment?" The boy nodded, a little unsure of what to do. He parked his bike and looked at them with wide, innocent eyes. The officers asked a few questions: his name, what he was doing, where he lived. The boy answered honestly, explaining that he was just delivering letters for neighbors who were away. He showed them the small stack of letters in his backpack as proof. The officers exchanged glances, still processing the scene, their expressions polite but cautious. The woman who had called the police stepped outside, anxious to see the situation unfold. She explained to the officers once again why she had called, emphasizing her fear and discomfort. Her words were precise, almost rehearsed, highlighting every detail she thought was important. The boy listened quietly, confused, not understanding why someone would think he was dangerous just for doing a simple chore. Neighbors began to notice the scene. Some stepped outside to see what was happening. Whispers traveled quickly through the street. "What's going on? Did something happen?" People watched as the officers talked to the boy, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. The boy's mother hadn't arrived yet, and the boy felt a mix of fear and embarrassment. He tried to stay calm, but it was hard. The situation seemed bigger than him, overwhelming and unfair. The tension in the air was palpable. The boy glanced across the street at the neighbor, who looked back at him with a mix of suspicion and relief that she had called for help. Neither fully understood the other, yet both were caught in a silent confrontation. The boy's mind raced. Was he in trouble? Was this his fault? Why couldn't she see that he was just a kid doing a harmless task? At that moment, the boy's mother arrived. She had seen the police cars and rushed over, her heart pounding. She stepped out of the car and quickly assessed the scene. Her eyes fell on her son, standing calmly but tensely, and then on the neighbor who looked uncomfortable under her gaze. She approached the officers and introduced herself politely but firmly. The boy's relief was immediate. Seeing his mother made him feel safe again. She knelt down to his level, giving him a reassuring smile and a gentle touch on the shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here now. Everything's fine." The boy exhaled slowly, the tension easing from his small shoulders. The woman who had called the police looked on, unsure of what to do next. She could see that the boy's mother was not just any parent. There was an air of authority and confidence about her. The officers listened as the mother spoke calmly, clarifying what had actually happened and why the boy had been in the area. The situation began to shift, though the neighbor still struggled with her initial assumptions. Even as the first part of this story closes, the scene is set for something unexpected. The boy is safe for now, but the events of this afternoon have shown how quickly fear and assumptions can escalate. In a quiet neighborhood that values safety and order, a simple act of kindness, delivering letters, was mistaken for something threatening. And yet hope lingers in the arrival of the mother, whose presence promises fairness, understanding, and a powerful reminder of the importance of perspective. The boy, standing beside his mother, learns an unspoken lesson. The world can misjudge you, but having someone who sees the truth can make all the difference. And the neighbor, watching the events unfold, is left to confront her own fears and assumptions, unaware that the next moments will challenge everything she thought she knew about authority, respect, and the true meaning of power. The air in the neighborhood had grown tense. The boy stood quietly beside his mother, glancing at the police officers and then back at the neighbor, who still seemed uneasy. He didn't fully understand why this had happened, but he could feel the weight of the situation. Adults were talking in a serious tone, and the usual calm of the quiet street was gone. He hugged his mother's hand a little tighter, seeking comfort. The police officers tried to remain neutral. They had dealt with situations like this before, but something about the calm, careful way the boy spoke made them pause. He wasn't defiant or aggressive. He was just a child caught in a misunderstanding. They asked him more questions gently, trying to get clarity. "Where do you live?" one officer asked. "Just over there," the boy replied, pointing down the street. "And what were you doing?" The boy explained, his voice steady despite the tension, that he was simply delivering letters to neighbors who weren't home during the week. The mother stood beside him, observing quietly at first, letting the boy answer. She wanted to make sure he had a chance to speak, to show that he had done nothing wrong. There was a careful pride in the way she looked at him, pride in his honesty, in his composure, and in his courage to face the situation. She could see that he was starting to feel nervous, and she gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "Just tell the truth." The neighbor across the street continued to watch. Her face showed a mix of fear, confusion, and something else. Embarrassment, though she didn't want to admit it. She had called the police, certain she was protecting her home. But now the reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. The boy was just a child. There was no sign of wrongdoing. No mail was missing. No property was damaged. Nothing had been stolen. And yet, for a few tense minutes, her actions had escalated the situation. The officers began to talk among themselves quietly. One of them turned to the neighbor and said, "We'll need to get more information about what you saw, ma'am. But it looks like this may have been a misunderstanding." Her lips pressed together tightly. She wanted to defend her actions, but even she had to admit that the boy had done nothing suspicious. She hadn't seen him steal anything or threaten anyone. Still, the fear she had felt was real to her, and that made her hesitate to fully admit she might have overreacted. Meanwhile, the boy's mother spoke to the officers, her voice calm but firm. "He is a responsible child," she said. "He was just doing something kind for the neighbors. Nothing he did could have been threatening. I think there's been a misunderstanding." Her words carried weight. There was authority in her tone, a quiet confidence that demanded respect. The officers nodded, realizing they were now dealing with a situation where emotions had run high and assumptions had clouded judgment. The boy, seeing the way his mother handled the situation, felt reassured. He looked up at her with a small smile, relieved that she was here. He had been scared, unsure of what might happen next, and now he could breathe a little easier. The police officers continued to ask a few more questions, making notes, but it was clear that the tone was shifting. What had started as a serious alarm was slowly being recognized as a misunderstanding fueled by fear and bias. Across the street, the neighbor's discomfort grew. She avoided eye contact and fidgeted with her hands. In her mind, she kept replaying the moment she had seen the boy near her property. She had convinced herself that he looked suspicious, that something might go wrong. Now, seeing the child standing calmly with his mother, the reality of her overreaction began to sink in. She felt embarrassed but didn't know how to admit it. Pride and fear often mixed in strange ways, and this was one of those moments. The mother turned to the neighbor, her voice gentle but clear. "I understand that you were concerned, and I appreciate that you wanted to keep your home safe," she said. "But it's important to be careful about assumptions, especially about children who are just trying to do good. We all need to look closely at the facts before reacting." The words were firm, but there was no anger. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who knew how to handle tense situations without escalating them. The officers nodded in agreement, adding that they were trained to investigate situations calmly and to make sure everyone's safety was considered. "We're not here to judge anyone," one said. "Our job is to understand what's happening and respond appropriately." It seems like this was just a misunderstanding. The neighbor's lips pressed together tightly. She nodded, unable to say much in response. She had realized that the officers were right. She had overreacted, and the consequences of her fear had been unnecessary. The boy, standing beside his mother, took a deep breath. The tension he had felt moments ago began to fade. He realized that he had done nothing wrong, and he could finally feel a sense of relief. Yet the experience had left its mark. He had learned that sometimes adults see things differently, and sometimes fear can make people act in ways that seem unfair. But he also learned that honesty, calmness, and having someone to protect you can make a huge difference. As the situation slowly calmed, some neighbors peeked out from their windows or came outside to watch. Whispers floated through the street. "Is everything okay? What happened?" They saw the officers speaking with the boy's mother, the boy standing quietly beside her and the neighbor still looking uneasy. It was clear to them that the situation was resolving. But the lesson was visible to everyone. Fear and assumptions can escalate quickly, even in a peaceful neighborhood. The mother continued to speak with the officers, ensuring they had all the details. She explained where the boy had been, why he had been delivering letters, and how long he had been outside. Her explanations were clear, factual, and calm. The officers listened attentively, nodding and taking notes. They could see that the boy had been entirely honest, that there had been no ill intent, and that this was a situation that could have been avoided with a little understanding and patience. The neighbor finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. I thought he was acting strangely," she said. "I didn't know he was just delivering letters." Her words were hesitant, almost apologetic. She realized that her assumptions had been wrong, and she didn't know how to repair the discomfort she had caused. The mother listened, not with anger but with understanding. "It's okay," she said. "We all need to learn to be careful about how quickly we assume the worst. Today, no one was harmed, and we can use this as an opportunity to be more aware." The officers began to pack up, satisfied that the situation was under control. They spoke briefly with the neighbor, advising caution and encouraging her to think carefully before calling for help in the future. They emphasized the importance of understanding and patience. The boy watched, still a little nervous but feeling safe because his mother had taken charge. He knew he had been treated fairly, and that made him feel proud. As the police cars drove away, the street slowly returned to its usual calm. Birds chirped again, the smell of freshly cut grass returned, and the quiet rhythm of suburban life resumed. The boy and his mother walked down the street, talking quietly about what had happened. She explained that while people sometimes make mistakes, it was important to handle situations calmly and with honesty. She reminded him that fear can cloud judgment, but truth and composure always matter. The neighbor watched from her yard, a mix of relief and lingering embarrassment on her face. She realized that her actions had consequences, and that her assumptions had almost caused unnecessary trouble. She had learned in a quiet but powerful way that understanding and patience are just as important as caution. The neighborhood, too, had witnessed the events and perhaps reflected on their own judgments and assumptions. For the boy, the afternoon had been a lesson in resilience. He had faced a confusing and unfair situation, yet he had remained calm and honest. He had seen how authority could be used wisely, as his mother had demonstrated, and he had learned the importance of standing firm in truth, even when others misunderstand. It was a lesson he would carry with him for a long time. The mother, walking beside him, kept a gentle but watchful eye. She knew the world could be unfair, but she also knew the power of guidance, protection, and calm authority. She had stepped in at the right moment to protect her child, and she had done so with grace and understanding. It was a quiet victory, a moment that would stay with both mother and child as a reminder of trust, safety, and the importance of fairness. As they approached their home, the boy looked up at his mother and smiled faintly. "Thank you," he whispered. She smiled back, squeezing his hand. "Always. You were brave and you did nothing wrong. Remember that." The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the neighborhood. The day had been tense, confusing, and challenging, but it ended with understanding, relief, and hope for the future. The street had quieted down after the police cars drove away, but the air still carried a hint of tension. The boy and his mother walked slowly back toward their home, both trying to process what had just happened. The boy's mind raced with questions. How could someone think he was dangerous just for delivering letters? How could fear make someone call the police on him so quickly? He glanced up at his mother, hoping she could explain. His mother noticed his troubled expression. She knelt down to his level and gently touched his shoulder. "Sometimes people let fear guide their actions," she said softly. "They might see something they don't understand and jump to conclusions. That's why it's important to stay calm and always tell the truth." Her words were comforting, but they also carried weight. The boy nodded, understanding in a small way, though the memory of flashing lights and police officers lingered in his mind. As they walked, neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering among themselves. Some looked curious, some concerned, and some felt guilty for watching without offering help. The incident had left a ripple across the street. The boy had always known his neighborhood to be peaceful, but today's events had shown him a side of it he hadn't seen before, a side where fear and assumptions could quickly disrupt the calm. The mother led her son to the front porch and waited for him to settle before speaking again. "I want you to remember something important," she said. "Even when people make mistakes or misunderstand, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. You did exactly what was right. You were honest, responsible, and calm. That matters more than what anyone else thinks." The boy smiled faintly, feeling reassured. He could feel the tension in his chest slowly ease, though he knew he would remember this day for a long time. Suddenly, a quiet voice came from the neighbor's yard. The woman had been standing there, hesitating, unsure of how to approach. I didn't mean to cause so much trouble," she said, her voice small and hesitant. She avoided looking directly at the boy as if afraid he might be angry. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The boy's mother looked at her steadily, recognizing the vulnerability in her tone. "It's okay," the mother replied calmly. "I understand that you were concerned, but we need to be careful about acting on fear without knowing the full story. Today's situation could have been very different if the police hadn't handled it carefully. We are all lucky it didn't get worse." Her words were firm but not harsh. She wanted the neighbor to understand, not feel attacked. The woman nodded slowly, a mix of relief and lingering shame on her face. She had realized her mistake, and the calm authority of the boy's mother made her see it clearly. The boy stood beside his mother, observing the exchange. He felt a mixture of curiosity and surprise. He had never seen his mother in this role before, not as a protector of the neighborhood, but as someone with real authority, someone who could calm tense situations with words alone. It was a quiet but powerful presence. He began to see that her strength wasn't just in her actions, but in her ability to handle people with understanding and fairness. The neighbor finally spoke more openly, her voice trembling slightly. I just didn't know," she admitted. I thought something bad might happen." Her words were simple, honest, and tinged with guilt. The mother nodded, acknowledging the fear without dismissing it. "I understand," she said. "Fear is natural, but we must always take a moment to look carefully before we act. We must remember that children especially are not threats. They are learning, growing, and exploring. Today was a lesson for all of us." The boy listened, taking in every word. He felt a sense of pride in the way his mother spoke. She had protected him without anger, corrected a mistake without shame, and handled the entire situation with calm intelligence. He realized that strength wasn't always about raising your voice or forcing people to listen. Sometimes it was about patience, understanding, and the courage to speak truth calmly. The neighbor, sensing the sincerity in the mother's words, finally looked directly at the boy. Her expression softened. I'm sorry," she said quietly. I shouldn't have called the police on you." The boy's mother placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, giving him space to respond. He looked at the woman and nodded. "It's okay," he said simply. "I know you were worried. It's all right." His calm response surprised the neighbor. She had expected anger, maybe even tears, but instead, she saw understanding and forgiveness. The mother continued to speak, turning her attention back to the neighbor. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What matters is that we learn from them. Today you saw how assumptions can escalate situations, and I hope this helps you be more careful in the future. We all share this neighborhood, and it works best when we respect and understand each other." Her tone was gentle but firm, carrying the weight of someone who knew exactly how to lead without forcing others. At that moment, the neighbor realized something unexpected. The way the mother spoke, the calm confidence, and the authority in her words, it was clear that she was not just any parent. There was power in her presence, a natural command that could influence even trained officers. The realization hit the neighbor suddenly, making her heart skip a beat. She had been so focused on fear that she hadn't considered who this woman was. The mother noticed the subtle shift in the neighbor's expression and allowed a small, knowing smile. She didn't need to speak. Her calm authority had already conveyed the message. The neighbor was speechless, trying to reconcile the image she had of this situation with the truth. The child standing beside her was safe, honest, and protected by someone far more powerful and capable than she had imagined. The officers, standing a few feet away, watched quietly. They could see the tension in the neighbor's posture, the shift in understanding as she realized the truth. They also noticed the boy's calm demeanor and the mother's composed presence. What had started as a simple call about a suspicious child had transformed into a lesson in authority, understanding, and the power of truth. The boy, still holding his mother's hand, felt a mixture of relief and awe. He had witnessed the shift in the neighbor's perception, seen the fear replaced with respect and a quiet sense of realization. He felt proud of his mother, not just for protecting him, but for showing what real leadership looked like, how calm authority and understanding could turn a tense situation into a teaching moment. The neighbor, finally finding her voice, spoke again. I didn't know who you were," she said, her tone hesitant. The mother nodded, understanding the awkwardness of the moment. "That's okay," she replied gently. "What matters is that we see the truth now and learn from it. That's what matters most." The boy looked up at his mother, feeling a quiet sense of pride and safety. He understood now that she was not only his protector, but someone who could influence people with calm authority. He felt reassured knowing that even when misunderstandings happened, he had someone who could handle them wisely and fairly. The weight of the situation began to lift, replaced with a sense of understanding and hope. The neighbor, still processing the events, finally nodded. She realized that her assumptions and fear had been unfounded, and she felt a mixture of embarrassment and respect. The boy's mother had not only protected her child, but had done so in a way that taught a lesson about fairness, truth, and the importance of perspective. The neighbor knew she would remember this moment for a long time, a reminder to approach situations with caution, understanding, and humility. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet street, the mother and her son began to walk home. The boy's steps were lighter now, his mind calmer and his heart less burdened. He had learned about honesty, composure, and the power of calm authority. He had seen how assumptions could cause unnecessary fear, but he had also seen how truth and understanding could resolve conflict and restore balance. The neighbor watched them walk away, realizing that she had witnessed something extraordinary. She had learned a valuable lesson in humility and awareness. The street, once filled with tension and uncertainty, began to feel like the neighborhood it was meant to be, a place where understanding and respect could guide interactions, rather than fear and assumptions. The boy and his mother reached their home, the familiar comfort of their porch and front door welcoming them back. The mother looked at her son with a soft smile, proud of the way he had handled himself. "You were very brave today," she said, "and you were honest. That matters more than anything else." The boy nodded, feeling a quiet sense of pride and relief. As they stepped inside, the mother reflected on the afternoon. She knew that the neighborhood had learned something too, that fear and assumptions could escalate quickly, but calm authority and truth could restore peace. She had protected her child, taught a lesson to a neighbor, and set an example of fairness and composure. It had been a tense, challenging afternoon, but it had ended with understanding, respect, and hope for the future. The day was slowly settling into the warm glow of late afternoon. The boy and his mother had returned to their home, but the events of earlier still lingered in their minds. The street had quieted down, yet a sense of reflection hung in the air. The neighbors who had witnessed the incident could not help but talk quietly among themselves. They shared whispers and cautious glances, each processing what had happened and thinking about the assumptions they had made. Knowingly or unknowingly, inside their home, the boy sat at the kitchen table, still a little shaken, but comforted by the presence of his mother. She had made him feel safe again, and he clung to that feeling as he recounted the moments of tension. "Mom, why did she think I was dangerous?" he asked quietly. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to sound brave. His mother reached across the table, holding his hand gently. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft but firm, "people let fear take over. They see something they don't understand and immediately think the worst. It doesn't make them bad, but it can make them act unfairly. Today it happened to you, but you stayed calm, honest, and respectful. That matters far more than what anyone else thinks." Her words carried warmth and reassurance, and the boy nodded, slowly beginning to understand. Meanwhile, outside, the neighbor still lingered in her yard. She wasn't sure whether to retreat into her house or attempt another conversation. There was a mix of embarrassment, guilt, and a growing respect for the mother who had handled everything so calmly. She remembered how quickly she had jumped to conclusions, how she had called the police without evidence, and how she had overreacted to a situation that was entirely innocent. For the first time, she could see how her actions affected others, even when her intentions were meant to protect herself. Eventually, the neighbor gathered the courage to step closer to the porch. The boy's mother, noticing her hesitation, offered a calm and inviting smile. "Is there something you'd like to say?" she asked gently. The neighbor nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go that far," she admitted. "I thought I was protecting my home, but I realize now I acted too quickly." The mother's smile softened, not with judgment, but with understanding. "It's okay," she said. "We all make mistakes, and we can all learn from them. What's important is that we reflect, recognize what went wrong, and do better next time. Today could have been worse, but it ended well because we all stayed calm and honest." Her tone carried authority, but also empathy. It was clear she spoke from experience, not just as a parent, but as someone who understood the power of careful guidance. The boy watched the interaction closely. He was learning, even in small ways, about responsibility, fairness, and the importance of handling conflicts with patience. He felt proud of his mother, proud of the way she had handled the situation, and proud of himself for remaining calm. The tension he had felt earlier slowly began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of security and understanding. The neighbor nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. She realized that her fear had clouded her judgment, and that her actions had almost caused unnecessary trouble. There was a humbling awareness in her gaze as she looked at the boy, who remained composed and honest despite the chaos. It was a quiet moment of reflection, one that carried more weight than any lecture could. She understood finally that assumptions could be harmful, and that approaching situations with patience and observation was far more effective than acting out of fear. Inside the home, the boy and his mother began discussing what had happened earlier. "Mom," he said thoughtfully, "I didn't do anything wrong, but it felt scary. I didn't know if the police would believe me." The mother squeezed his hand, her eyes full of warmth and reassurance. "You were brave," she said. "You stayed calm and told the truth. That's how people see who you really are. No matter what anyone else thinks, honesty and composure always matter." Outside, the neighbor slowly stepped back into her yard, realizing she needed to reflect privately. She could feel the weight of the morning's events, and a small part of her felt ashamed. She had learned, perhaps for the first time, that fear and assumptions could cloud judgment, and that the consequences of acting too quickly could ripple far beyond her intentions. It was a lesson she would carry with her, a reminder to act thoughtfully and carefully. As the afternoon turned to early evening, a few neighbors ventured outside to speak with the mother and her son. They wanted to offer support, express relief that no one had been hurt, and acknowledge the calm way the mother had handled the situation. Each brief conversation carried warmth and understanding, and the boy began to feel a sense of community he had not noticed before. While the day had started with tension and misunderstanding, it was ending with connection and reflection. One of the neighbors spoke quietly to the mother. "You handled that so well," she said. "I was watching from my window and I could see how calm and collected you were. It made me realize how easy it is to misjudge situations when we act on fear." The mother nodded, appreciating the honesty and openness in the words. "We all learn," she said. "What matters is that we take these lessons to heart and try to do better next time." The boy, feeling reassured, helped carry some groceries inside. He felt a sense of pride, not in doing anything extraordinary, but in being part of a moment where calm, honesty, and understanding had made a difference. He realized that people could learn from mistakes, that fear could be addressed with patience, and that even tense situations could end with respect and clarity. Meanwhile, the neighbor returned to her home, quietly reflecting. She thought about her assumptions, the quick judgment she had made, and the embarrassment she now felt. Yet there was also a sense of gratitude. She had witnessed a remarkable example of authority used wisely, and she had seen the importance of calm, careful leadership. It was a lesson she would not forget. Inside, the boy and his mother shared a quiet moment. The mother looked at her son, her eyes filled with pride. "Today was challenging," she said, "but it also taught us both something valuable. You learned about courage, honesty, and patience, and I was reminded of how important it is to guide people with calm and understanding." The boy nodded, feeling a warmth in his chest. He realized that even though the day had started with fear and misunderstanding, it had ended with clarity, respect, and learning. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow across the neighborhood, the mother and her son took a short walk around the block. The street seemed different now, quieter, calmer, yet filled with awareness. People glanced at them, some with acknowledgement, some with silent reflection. The events of the day had left their mark on the neighborhood, creating a shared understanding of caution, respect, and the importance of seeing situations clearly before acting. The boy felt a sense of pride, not just in himself, but in the way his mother had handled everything. He realized that true authority was not about power or control, but about guidance, patience, and fairness. He had seen firsthand how someone could diffuse tension, teach important lessons, and maintain respect, all while protecting the innocent. Back at home, the mother prepared a small snack for the boy. They sat together at the kitchen table, enjoying the quiet after the storm. "Mom," he said, "I think I understand now. People sometimes let fear guide them, but we can stay calm and honest, and that can make a difference." The mother smiled, proud of his insight. "Exactly," she said. "And that difference can change the outcome of a situation, just like it did today." Outside, the neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Children played quietly, neighbors tended their gardens, and the hum of everyday life resumed. Yet a subtle shift had taken place. People had witnessed the events and had been reminded of the importance of patience, understanding, and fairness. The neighborhood had learned, in a gentle but meaningful way, that fear should not dictate actions and that calm, thoughtful leadership could guide everyone toward resolution. The boy, sitting beside his mother, felt a sense of relief and security. He had learned that honesty, patience, and calmness could protect him even in stressful situations. He had seen the neighbor recognize her mistake, and he had witnessed the quiet authority of his mother. It was a day of lessons, not just for him but for everyone around. As evening settled in, the mother tucked her son into bed. "Remember today," she said softly. "You were brave, honest, and calm. Those qualities matter more than anything else. Never forget that." The boy nodded, feeling reassured and safe. He drifted off to sleep, carrying the lessons of the day with him, knowing that even when fear and misunderstanding arise, truth, patience, and calm authority can make all the difference. The neighborhood, now calm under the glow of streetlights, seemed to carry a quiet understanding. What had begun as a moment of fear and tension had ended with lessons learned, respect earned, and a sense of community strengthened. The events of the day would not be forgotten, and the subtle changes in awareness and understanding would guide the neighborhood in the days to come. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. The air was calm, the streets quiet, and yet there was a subtle sense of awareness that hadn't been there before. People walked a little slower, spoke a little more carefully, and looked around with a mix of caution and understanding. Yesterday's events had left an impression, and while the tension had passed, the lessons remained. Inside their home, the boy sat at the kitchen table eating breakfast. His mother moved around the kitchen with calm efficiency, preparing coffee for herself and a small snack for her child. The boy's mind was still replaying the events of the previous day. He remembered the flashing lights, the stern voices of the officers, and the neighbor's worried expression. But he also remembered his mother's calm words, the way she handled the situation with patience and authority, and the relief he had felt when everything began to settle. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "do you think the neighbor will ever see things differently now?" She looked at him thoughtfully, then smiled gently. "I think she will," she replied. "It might take time, but people can change when they realize the truth. She saw you were honest, and she saw how calmly I handled things. That leaves a mark." Her words were steady and reassuring, and the boy nodded, feeling a small spark of hope. The mother had spent the morning reflecting as well. She knew that yesterday had been more than a simple misunderstanding. It had been a test of composure, fairness, and patience. She thought about the neighbor's fear, the boy's calmness, and the police officer's professionalism. She realized how quickly fear could escalate into conflict, and how much courage it took to stay calm under pressure. She also recognized the opportunity the day had provided, not just for her child, but for the neighborhood as a whole, to learn about respect, understanding, and awareness. The boy, finishing his breakfast, stood up and stretched. "Mom," he said, "I think I understand now. Even when people are wrong, we can stay calm, and that can change everything." She smiled warmly at him. "Exactly," she said. "Calmness, honesty, and patience can change situations far more than anger or fear ever could. You learned that yesterday, and I hope you will carry it with you always." Later in the morning, the boy decided to take a walk down the street. He wanted to see the neighborhood return to its usual rhythm, and to understand how people were reacting after the events of yesterday. As he walked, he noticed small signs of reflection. Neighbors were chatting quietly, some glancing toward his house with a mix of curiosity and newfound respect. He realized that his mother's handling of the situation had left a visible impression. People were more thoughtful, more aware of their own assumptions, and more careful about how quickly they judged others. One of the neighbors, an older woman who had been watching from her window, stepped outside and called softly, "Good morning." The boy waved politely, feeling confident and proud. She smiled back and nodded toward his house. "Your mother handled everything beautifully yesterday," she said. "It was a lesson for all of us." The boy felt a warmth in his chest. He knew she was right. What had happened yesterday was more than a personal event. It had become a quiet lesson for the whole street. As he continued walking, the boy thought about the neighbor who had called the police. He remembered her fear, her hesitation, and finally her realization of the truth. He wondered how she felt this morning. He hoped she had taken the mother's words to heart, and he believed she would. People often needed time to reflect, to truly understand mistakes, and he hoped yesterday's events had given her that opportunity. Back at home, the mother was preparing a small stack of letters for delivery. She watched her son with a quiet pride. He had been brave, honest, and composed, and she could see how the experience had already started shaping him. Life had a way of teaching lessons unexpectedly, and she knew that he had learned something powerful about courage, patience, and truth. She also knew that he had seen her in a role he might not have fully understood before, someone who could protect, guide, and teach through calm authority. Around mid-morning, the neighbor appeared again, cautiously approaching the house. She carried a small plate of cookies as a gesture of goodwill. The boy's mother greeted her politely, inviting her to step onto the porch. "Good morning," the neighbor said softly, her voice tinged with humility. I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. I acted too quickly and made a mistake. I hope you can forgive me." The mother smiled gently, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "Acknowledging mistakes is the first step to understanding and growth. I appreciate your honesty. We all have moments where we act out of fear. What matters is that we learn and do better next time." The neighbor nodded, feeling relief and gratitude. It was a small moment, but it carried weight. A quiet reconciliation that marked a turning point. The boy, standing beside his mother, offered a small nod. "It's okay," he said simply. "I know you were scared. That's all right." His calm, understanding words seemed to surprise the neighbor. She had expected anger or resentment, but instead she saw patience and forgiveness. The boy's composure, even after such a stressful experience, reflected the lessons his mother had taught him. The afternoon passed quietly. The neighborhood slowly returned to its familiar rhythm, but the memory of yesterday's events lingered. Conversations between neighbors carried new awareness. People reflected on how fear could cloud judgment and how calm authority and honesty could restore balance. The boy and his mother became quiet symbols of that lesson, proof that patience, fairness, and understanding could overcome misunderstanding and fear. Later that day, the boy's mother took him to a nearby park. As they walked along the path, she spoke gently about the lessons of the past day. "Remember, life will test you in unexpected ways," she said. "Sometimes people will judge you unfairly, or fear will make them act quickly. But your honesty, calmness, and integrity will guide you through those moments. You saw it yesterday, and you can carry it forward for the rest of your life." The boy nodded thoughtfully, taking in her words. He understood now that yesterday had been more than a confusing or frightening experience. It had been an important lesson in courage, truth, and patience. He had learned that even in situations where people misunderstand, calm and honest actions could restore trust and respect. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the park, the mother and son sat on a bench watching children play nearby. The boy thought about how quickly fear had escalated yesterday, and how important it was to remain calm. He realized that even small actions, like delivering letters or helping neighbors, could be misinterpreted. But honesty and composure could always shine through. Back in the neighborhood, the woman who had called the police reflected on her actions. She had learned a powerful lesson about assumptions, fear, and understanding. She now knew that her quick judgment could have caused unnecessary harm, and she felt a quiet determination to act differently in the future. The mother's calm authority and the boy's honesty had made a lasting impression, not just on her, but on the entire street. As evening fell, the boy returned home with his mother. They sat together on the porch, enjoying the quiet of the neighborhood. The boy felt a deep sense of gratitude for his mother's guidance, for the lessons of the day, and for the opportunity to witness how honesty, patience, and calm authority could transform a situation. The mother looked at her son with a proud smile. "You did well today," she said. "And not just today, yesterday too. You stayed honest, brave, and calm. Never forget that these qualities are more powerful than fear or anger." The boy nodded, feeling the warmth of her words settle in his heart. He knew he had grown in ways he hadn't expected, learning lessons about courage, fairness, and patience that would stay with him for the rest of his life. That night, as the neighborhood settled into silence, the boy lay in bed reflecting on everything that had happened. He thought about fear, misunderstanding, honesty, patience, and calm authority. He thought about his mother, the neighbor, the officers, and the community. He understood now that even small actions could carry weight, that assumptions could lead to conflict, and that calmness and truth were powerful tools for resolving tension. In the quiet of the night, he felt a sense of peace. He knew that while the events of yesterday had been challenging, they had also been transformative. They had taught lessons about fairness, understanding, and human connection, lessons that would shape not just him, but everyone who had witnessed the day's events. The mother, checking on her son before leaving his room, whispered softly, "You were brave. You were honest. You were calm. Never forget that." The boy closed his eyes, feeling comforted and proud. He had learned that even in the face of misunderstanding and fear, the right actions, truth, patience, and calmness, could guide the way. Outside, the neighborhood slept, calm and quiet under the stars. The events of the day had left a lasting impression, a subtle shift in awareness and understanding that would continue to influence how people saw each other, acted in fear, and respected honesty. It was a day that had started with tension and uncertainty but ended with understanding, growth, and hope for the future.